All right, I think we are all set.
All right, do I need my hammer? Okay, today is March 14th, 2022 at 4 p.m. This is the Communications Committee meeting. I'm going to call this meeting to order. First, can we do roll call?
Council Seiler?
Here.
Council Anderson?
Here.
Thank you.
All right. The first item on the agenda is approval of the February 14th, 2022 minutes.
So moved.
Second?
Council Seiler?
Yes.
Council Anderson?
Yes.
Thank you.
And then the next item is some general updates. So we're going to talk a little bit about Counselor Corner Live, the budget communications plan, and the website rollout. So first, I just want to kick things off talking about Counselor Corner Live, which we have scheduled for March 31st. Paul Johnson, Liam, Allison, and myself met last Monday to talk a little bit more about the format and structure and how we were thinking about approaching it. And I just wanted to make sure you and Ken had the opportunity to share some thoughts or ideas. So I'm trying to think about what we talked about last time. But again, I think what we really narrowed down the topic was let's just focus on growth in general. Let's not get too specific and kind of see where the conversation goes. So the intent of these are really to be conversational in nature. So we debated and talked about the merit of like coming in with questions. And I think what we decided was let's just focus on some key prompts to start the dialogue, and then have some prompts throughout the discussion that could help to prompt the conversation as we go forward. That could actually be for the council or for the public that are participating. Because again, it's not intended to be just Paul and I having a back and forth. I think what we said would be a good Counselor Corner Live would be actually the engagement from the participants, where perhaps even Paul and I do the least amount of talking and everybody else is kind of joining in the conversation. So it's going to be hybrid. We're encouraging physical participation because we think we'll get a better conversation. Physically, it's just easier to have. Yeah. But, Liam will be our moderator and will help to watch the online version to see if there's comments or questions that come in to make sure that we're taking the time to recognize the people participating virtually. I think we talked about streaming it live on Facebook in addition to YouTube to see if that's an option.
Yeah, to have a higher viewership. Yeah, it's something that we haven't done before, but I think we could do it just by having another camera there. And then we had also talked about, back to the prompts, that it wouldn't necessarily be that the two of you even know what the prompts are. It's more just a catalyst for continuing the conversation if there's any lull.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. So really just trying to let it be a natural conversation and see where things go.
That's in line with what I think we talked about originally. So,
yeah,
hopefully that flows. These things are always so well intended, and this will not be the first initiative that I have been a part of like this, where the best laid plans, right? Like we are hoping for the best engagement, and then also kind of preparing if there's two people who come and it ends up being just you and Paul having a conversation.
Well, I think that's
and
what
that
we
would
talked
be
about.
Okay if that's how it goes. But
we talked about that, and we think Paul and I probably could talk for an hour if we needed to. Not that that's what we want to do, but again, I think that's the thing. It's recruiting people to participate, which I think Allison's going to try and promote it to get people to come. I know we also talked about at the meeting to just challenge each other, Paul and myself at least, to find at least one or two people that would be willing to come and participate just to drive participation. And I also extended that ask to the council just to say, if you have one person or a couple of people that are interested in this topic, but maybe aren't as comfortable coming to our council meetings or the more formal venues. Because again, I think the hope is that this is much more conversational as opposed to educational, right? We're not necessarily there to educate them and then get feedback. It's more, we just want to hear about growth and talk about it. So I don't know, Liam or Allison, if there's anything I missed that you'd want to add.
No, I mean, I think that it's, because it's the first one, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what actually happens. If we have really good attendance, maybe it is a really good open conversation. I think that, it could also just very well be you and Paul bantering back and forth for an hour. probably be somewhere in between.
Yeah.
But I think that I think as you said, being prepared with some questions, some prompts to kind of facilitate that. I think we can all think about how we don't want it to go. We don't want it to be a spirited debate between parties. We don't want it to just be essentially a glorified public comment section. We do want it to be one that invites conversation and various viewpoints. And I think in that format, it will be educational. But I agree that it's not intended for any of you to just make a long
presentation or
Right.
anything like
Two
that.
slide deck.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about
Yeah.
like, do we want a slide deck? And
Yeah.
I think because I like to prepare, I was leaning more towards slide deck questions, and then I think Paul reminded me like the intent is to be conversational, and I feel like trying to keep it more natural and fluid is going to be important. I think no pressure to Liam, but as our moderator, I think it's gonna really.
I need to
fall
prepare. Unfortunately, I can't take that same strategy.
yeah. But I think Paul and I too can think about that as we're engaging in the conversation. Like a lot of times it's more, in my opinion, when it comes to conversation, it's not just responding, but it's like asking a question, right? To get like, well, why do you think that way?
Yeah.
Like, tell me more, like things like that he and I could probably, along with you, think a little bit about to just, incite more dialogue.
We also talked about doing a video snippet beforehand, just so people, of the two of you, so people have a sense of even what to go in expecting. So they kind of get the sense of the tone ahead of time.
Like it.
So, yeah.
Promotional video.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was
Like it.
Paul's idea.
Where is it? Here?
We're gonna do it hybrid, so it'll be here and online.
Okay.
But I don't know. I prefer something kind of like what we're in right now
Yeah.
versus, us sitting up there, even
That's why
sitting
I
close
asked.
to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this is a little bit more,
Yeah.
even for us, more conversational.
So we'll see how it goes.
I do have a couple of questions. So I think we had initially been using 5 o'clock as the time, and I've been seeing 5:30 more recently. So I just want to know what I'm sticking with when we're promoting it.
I think 5:30 for me is better, just so I
Okay.
can. I sometimes have meetings that go straight up till 5, so just planning for 5:30 will be
Yeah,
better.
make the call right now, 5:30.
Yep.
Fine.
And then we had also talked about doing a pre-registration link ahead of time to get a sense of attendance. But if we are doing that, just like getting that set, I don't know how we would get that set up.
It'd be a Zoom feature. I guess I don't want to dissuade people who maybe last minute don't know if they're going to attend and feel like it's more formal if they sign up as if they're taking a seat from someone else. So I'd be more inclined to keep it and just be prepared for 30 people to show up on Zoom or none.
Okay.
So I think that, and so I think also just speaking out loud for myself, just being prepared for, if we have 2 people on Zoom and 3 people in person, I mean, that doesn't require a whole lot of kind of ground rules or how we're going to try to interact. But if there's a really wide attendance, I think we need to be prepared with some expectations for the evening. We may not be able to get to everyone who wants to make a statement or be part of it. So I think it's just, we're going to be very fluid.
It's a good call. We also talked about, and I just don't know if something special needs to happen, but enabling the chat feature in Zoom so that, again, questions or comments can be shared there, which I don't think we typically use.
No, that's just a setup with the webinar, so I can set that up.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Any thoughts, comments?
No, I'm excited. I think
So
if we get some decent participation, this will be fun.
yeah, I
It'll
think
be I think it feels overdue for some of us too, right? Like this is hopefully a step toward more engagement. I think it's great.
so. Hopefully, I think afterwards, I would think in our April meeting, which would be our next one, it would probably be good to do like a postmortem,
Yeah.
just to be like, what went well, what
Sure.
didn't go well, are we
Yes.
going to do this again, or are we not going to do it again? I mean, I think we should try it at least twice to see if we can figure something, because I think part of it will be the repetition. But if, to me, like participation is key. And if we can't get people to participate, then, not that it's, 5 people is worth it, but at the same time, that's a good question for us to think about is like, what do we consider good for these? Is it 20 people, 10 people? And, maybe that's something we think about after
Yeah.
this first one.
Could just turn into the John and Paul podcast.
There
It
you go.
could. I don't know if I want to. I don't know if I could do that, but I think he would love that. I don't know if I would want to be in the podcast all the time.
Personalized, yeah. All right, fair enough.
All right. So next item is budget communications plan, which I think Allison, you're gonna share
Yeah,
a little
and
bit.
Liam has a couple slides put up, but this is very much in line with what we did last year. It's kind of started last year, and or having a set plan around it was started last year. But I wanted to use this as a time to show you the direction, and it's not necessarily set in stone until we have more of the information and the details of the budget more put out, so we can develop the content further. But you can go on to the next one. But, oh, can you go one more, sorry,
This,
or to the visual? I can't remember what page it's on, maybe 5 or something.
There?
Yeah, thank you. So this looks very similar to the one that we used last year, the budget communications plan. And at that time, this was kind of our March meeting was with the school department or with the BOE. And so we met with them and talked about ways to incorporate or see the overlap between the school board budget and the town budget and where they coincided. And then we also put in what the communication opportunities were through various channels. So the top line shows what those communication channels are and the dates that were kind of pinpointed. And then the bottom shows the meeting dates. So I just put in, we have the 15th and the 1st as the newsletter timeframe for each of the months. I also put in some placeholder dates for leader articles, and then also assuming that some of the council corners might be budget related, but that might come up later in the conversation too on what we're designating. And then, so I guess there's 2 points of communication. One is the content that we develop, and then 2 is these meetings are happening all throughout the next 3 months and being able to provide updates, ongoing updates on what's happening in the meetings as well. So I kind of strayed from last year's communication plan based on this year. Last year is very much focused around the pandemic response and COVID and kind of restoration. And this time around, we went with the theme of responding to community needs, just because last fall with the rollout of the community survey and seeing those responses come in and kind of based on what we talked about as the goals in January for communications for the year, it just seemed to make sense that if we're seeing that there are certain points of interest for people and like growth or traffic, how can we tie back what's happening in the budget to that? And then another way I was thinking of it too was a lot of them are short-term needs. These are the priorities, and so that's why it's in the budget. And then there are others that are more of like longer-term priorities or thinking about investment strategy for the next 2 to 5 years, which is kind of in line with what the community survey response areas were too, was thinking longer term over the course of years rather than the next year. So with that in mind, I want to break down kind of what that content could look like. But this just gives a visual of the timeline and where there are opportunities. But I want to pause here if any of you have input on incorporating council communications into leader spaces and things like that.
I think when it comes to the counselor corner, my assumption coming in today when we get to that item was like budget will be one of the topics that we'll do probably each month, starting in April, May, and June, just to kind of have a counselor corner on it. Like I was thinking perhaps Paul writes one kind of kicking things off as finance chair, and then April, you or I could write one in May or June, just to have that be like the continued conversation around budget. So I think we should plan for that. I love your theme. I think that's a great theme. I hope in the budget book, when people are kind of saying why, I hope they took the time to kind of tie it back to the survey, so that way it's easier for us to communicate, right? But I don't think it'll be hard to kind of draw the two together, right?
Right.
Because again, I think it was so comprehensive. There's going to be something we could point to in the survey. So I think that's really cool that we try and leverage that to the greatest extent possible.
We'll go through it more too, but there were a few areas where there wasn't necessarily a direct tie of like something in the budget matching affordable housing, for example, or something like that. But there might be opportunities where we could present it as an angle, or at least acknowledging it, or using it as a way to like get a message across. I'll show you in the examples, but not necessarily always directly tied
Sure,
to a budget.
Sure. And I mean, I think it's probably reasonable that we're going to have budget items that aren't directly tied to, the survey, and that's okay. But like that consistent messaging, you're so great about that part of it. Just like we have a thread, and when possible, we're going to keep tying on to that thread to just create more of a story for people to understand what the budget drivers are this year. I think that's great.
And I did suggest to Jillian Trapini, who's the chair of the comms committee. I don't think she could attend, but she's going to watch this, because I was like, we should try and make sure their budget plan or communications is aligned. So making sure that they know this theme, because I think it's a theme that will work for them as well.
Yeah, I think for council perspective, we should keep in mind that they have a brand new communications chair and a brand new finance chair who have not been through this process before. They have their budget meeting in 10 minutes, the first one. So, I think not that council has necessarily like inserted ourselves in their process. We've tried to be, when I was on the board, people tried to be good partners so that we had a communication strategy that worked for everybody. But I foresee this year maybe that us needing to initiate that a little bit stronger, just so they know, like, if they need support, or, if there are ways that we can join forces, like, we're certainly open to that. Just because I think that there's some, some uncertainty, I think, about what their role is and how to access us, on the council side.
Even the simple thing that you did, I think you did it over the weekend of promoting the workshops. For them, that was huge. Like, I heard from them, they're like, thank you, John, this is excellent. I was like, it wasn't me, it was Allison. So little things like that, I think they really appreciate. So I don't think it needs to be a lot, but just kind of like you have here, all of these dates on there. And I did talk to Jillian, and it was mostly related to your suggestion that we kind of have them come and talk about cross-platform communications with Jeff's superintendent letter, our e-news. And I even thought of like the library
superintendent doing this too. I mean, there's a lot of turnover on their side this year.
And so I suggested maybe the budget, because it's all relevant, topical, could be the area we try and focus first to try and drive that cross collaboration. And so just some simple things that we talked about potentially doing, which I don't know the feasibility or if this would work, was like if we just had like a consistent, blurb and link about budget that, Jeff could potentially include on the superintendent newsletter, Nancy could include on the library newsletter, and we would include in our e-news. That's a consistent look and feel, so everybody who gets those knows. And then we can also like promote, click here to go to the e-news, click here to go to the library, like just to try and tie them together a little bit and drive.
And I think that was kind of the reasoning of the budget portal being created a few years ago. But that was school and town related too, because the school site also drives back to the budget portal. So just finding opportunities where we can tie in content from both places. So as I was going through this too, I had forgotten that we had done an e-newsletter that was dedicated just to the budget. We have the April 1st newsletter, and then it was the following week we did one that was with the school and kind of a shared document. So I should go back and look at that and see if that's feasible too. Because they did a lot of work of getting me the content for that.
Oh yeah, that's
but
right.
It's new.
Might just be helpful to share with them if it's easy to share like what was done last year and how much it's like easy for them to just easily recreate.
And just kind of see where, I mean, I'm making assumptions that they would like, some assistance. Maybe they have a different strategy this year. I mean, new people come in with new ideas, so I don't want to overstep. But I certainly want to at least touch base with them and let them know what is available and what we have done in the past, so that they can kind of say, yes, we do as a board want to tie into this, or and let you know too, so that if they decide they're going to do their own communication strategy, we're not spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to incorporate them into the mix.
Okay, that sounds good.
Was there anything from last year, Allison, that that you took off that you thought wasn't a good use of communication, or anything new that you added? Because again, I think you did such a fantastic job last year. Like, I don't know if we want to change too much, but if you think there's other better things to do, I'm just curious.
I don't think so. There was a lot last year that we're kind of anticipating, like doing more of educational pieces and I have it even on here still, but doing more of like introducing the budget portal and explaining how to use it and things like that. I guess my approach would be focusing more on the content of the budget and what's interesting to people. So I think that more of the efforts will be happening in April and May once the presentation has happened and it's public for people to view the full document, and then kind of break it out from there.
I think the one area that's maybe just something to think more about later on in the budget process is the CIP. Because I think that's where, we could probably do a better job painting the picture of what you said about, like, here's the near-term ask, which might be a couple of things, but don't lose sight that we have some of these bigger asks as well. So when people are making their decisions, they're looking at the big investments overall and how those maybe interrelate, just to kind of, look at it from a bigger, longer-term investment perspective. So I don't know how we go about that, but I know I've talked to Paul.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, because I think like one approach that we did a lot last year was like highlighting certain projects. Like we did a video about the hub and showing a full tour of the hub, but another angle could be a video about varying project priorities, and here are some examples of short term and here's some long term, like kind of like a zoomed out approach that has a few different examples rather than a deep dive into one specific one.
I think the CIP is probably the best example to do something like that, because the rest of the budget is just next year looking, right? Like the only thing that's multi-year looking is CIP.
I think that's a good point, John. I think that to the degree a lot of capital improvements have multiple steps, too. And so, we have to there's a lay the groundwork. We have to do the study. We have to do the whatever before we can build it, and I think there's some examples there of, I think that just to build off of, and I don't know do you want to get into some of the
I think
stuff
that would
now?
be helpful to show some examples.
I think that, and we were just, or Allison was looking at your communications plan from a council standpoint. And I think that you, again, I don't have your matrix in front of me, but that sort of idea of, you have kind of council goals and you have, I think the degree I think the overarching theme will be, again, as Allison said, responding to community need. And a lot of that will be built off of and tying financial investments back to the feedback we got in the community survey. I think there's 4 or 5 big items that we can point to and say, the ones that I just wrote down, we obviously the community center was a big one. In the capital plan, again, this is all subject to change. Obviously the manager's going through all of it, but right now there's an earmark in there for a community center study and for a sum of money. So again, the feedback we got was we need a community center. Here's what we're taking as we heard you. Here's the next step. Yep. We got some feedback with regard to public safety and public service around visibility of law enforcement. And so there will be an initiative in there to try to respond to that.
That's great.
Bike and pedestrian safety was another big one. And there's a number, I think there's 2 fairly large capital projects in there to improve bike and pedestrian safety on some pretty major thoroughfares. So we're going to highlight those. Again, it's responding to the needs. And so I think the other things, though, that I think it's appropriate to draw back to, and I don't think we do a very good job historically, is yes, we have the community survey now. We also are on the heels of some charter work. And while it remains to be seen what's going to come forward for the voters to approve, I do think, as we spoke about last week, there were some themes that came through around transparency, ideas around what are your assets. I think one of the council goals was, what is our facilities plan? Right. And I think that there was some fairly good discussion in the Charter Review Committee that spoke about, yes, we have these assets. Yes, we have these facilities. Do we really know what state they're in? Are we really working to protect them and invest in them? And so there's a facilities assessment earmark in there for the capital plan. So again, that's tying two things together. I also think a number of those initiatives, specifically around bike pedestrian construction and improvements, the comp plan. Again, we go through this whole comp plan process, and then it sits on a shelf. That's the critique, right? It sits on a shelf for 10 years. We never look at it. So I think that just generally we can do a better job. And I think that, but for me, those are the four things that I think we should just routinely, when it comes to budget, just as a matter of policy and practice, we should be tying comp plan, what ties back to the comp plan, what ties back to council goals. And again, the two unique things this year are that Charter Review Committee work. So what were the themes that came through there? What is the feedback we got from citizens and the community survey? And so I think that, again, there will be a nice tagline here and some marketing around that, responding to community need. But I think to the degree we pull out these larger initiatives, to your point, specifically around capital, although there are certainly some operational things that I think go to improve some of that. We should really be identifying that and tying those things together. So it does seem like it's a cohesive plan to move forward.
I love that.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think these four things are great. And I wish like this would have been good guidance to have given to the staff as they were working on it, just to kind of think about those things. Like, because these are all, to your point, really good ways to tie it back in. Because everything that you mentioned, they either approved the community or were part of developing. And so to me, it just makes a stronger justification on their part. But I think trying to look at that, like as we review it, will be an important element and aspect.
And I think that's, I mean, to your question, I think that staff, again, I think staff sees a lot of the same picture that the residents see, and I think that they oftentimes are on the ground to respond to those concerns and critiques. I think, again, what's been lacking, and with Allison's addition to staff, which she's phenomenally good at, is linking those things, seeing the big picture. And it's not that the comp plan just sits on a shelf. We actually are actively, but we don't have anyone saying, and here's, we're doing this, and here's why. It ties to this work that we did. And so that disconnect does, I think, at times lead to questions about, well, where did this come from? Why do we need this? Who told us that we needed it? And so I think that that's really a more cohesive, well-rounded picture we should look to develop.
That'd be awesome. I think too, the one thing you said too about CIP stuff, which to me is always a little confusing, but to your point, there might be something in the CIP that we forgot about that relates to a study that was done, that relates to something else that was done before something else, and like being able to like express
Give that background.
Sometimes is really helpful, which even for us, I think like last year for me, some of these things I was just like, what is that? And so to know the history sometimes is helpful to know how we got to where we are.
Right. And I think what you'll find is that there's probably a story to almost everything. Every new purchase, it's, well, what is it replacing and when did that come online and why? And even something as seemingly innocuous as a sidewalk plow. We didn't used to plow our sidewalks. Up until 3 years ago, that was a contracted service and it had been for years and years and years. And our contractor got out of it. And all of a sudden we were looking at a $300,000 investment on equipment that we never used to have. We used to, I think, contract that out at $80,000 a year. Contracts came back twice that. There's a whole story that led into, well, why do we need to replace this now? Or if someone's really paying attention, we never bought one of these before. And so I think that there probably is a lot of history to all of that.
One thing, and I don't know, this might be getting too far down a path, but like, I think it would be interesting to know again, like what decisions did we not make this year relative to the survey too? Like if there are things, because you mentioned sidewalks, and I always feel like, at least for me, I always am getting comments from people of like, I wish the town would plow my sidewalk. And it's like, well, it costs money and you have to be willing to pay for it. But, maybe that's not this year, but maybe there's a plan that's being developed to look at that in the future, but we're not doing it. So I don't know if there's like big things like that maybe we can kind of think about as we look at the budget of like, well, based on the survey results, where are we seeing some gaps, and like maybe that's a 2024 thing,
Sure.
or we had to make some choices and
Yep.
those just didn't make the cut.
Yeah. I think there probably will be, and I'm not, for obvious reasons, I think, not inclined to highlight the opportunities for improvement in the survey that we frankly don't have answers to, or there are no easy
Yeah.
answers to. But I think that there is some of the answer to that question probably lies in that document as well. I think one other area that, again, I'm probably pulling us way off track, Allison, but obviously affordability of town services, always a huge issue, right? So taxes, I think that there's an opportunity to highlight, I believe that we're going to come forward with some proposals on ARPA funds. So what the impact is there. I also think that there's some good stories around other federal dollars, grants that have come in, so for example, if you look at the capital plan last year, you would have saw for FY23 a capital item for SCBA packs to the tune of $500,000. I know we already talked about this at Finance Committee. That CIP ask has been reduced to, I think, $70,000 as proposed in FY23 because we were able to obtain a grant for $430,000 from FEMA. I think it was FEMA. I apologize to the federal agency that takes offense if it wasn't that, but and so there's a story there, about staff efforts to find additional or other resources and other financial means to do that. So that's another piece that will. I think we can tie it back to the survey to say we're really working hard to reduce the local investment. Here's an example of that, and oh, by the way, here's some other funds that we're using to limit that.
I can see on your paper ARPA too. So is that ARPA or does that just look like ARPA too?
No, it says ARPA. Yeah,
Okay.
It's an ARPA exercise we went through. Yeah,
because I think
our
that
capital plan actually.
Yeah, that'll
So
be
identifying
interesting
those
to be
things,
able to, because I know that was the conversation last year was let's wait before we decide what to do with ARPA, and we've started to chip away at it.
Yep.
And we started, like last time we voted on getting Toady some of those new voting booths.
Yeah.
And so I'm assuming this will also express a little bit more what we're doing with those ARPA funds as well.
And I think that's where everything's going to get kind of interwoven. Because I
Yeah.
think there are things that we're going to be using or propose to use ARPA funds for that get at the bike and pedestrian projects, which is in our capital plan, which also is leveraging funds that aren't local. And so I think and I think as those examples that touch on, again, and also came out of the comprehensive plan, because this is something that matters to people. I think to the degree we can find things that tick all those boxes for that story. I mean, that's a great promotional opportunity.
Those are high, that's a high interest, engagement. People want to know we were granted X number of dollars, like what is the plan, and if so, we can tie it all to all of these different reasons and directions that we're, justifying using these funds. That's great.
So I've gotten us a bit off track, I think.
No, but that is still relevant to one of them. But yeah, so this is kind of pulling from, I was referencing, John, the document that you had made on the communications framework for the year, and it listed out 5 different survey focus areas. And so I took each of those focus areas and then saw some links of certain areas of the budget that we could pull out and highlight. And it doesn't even need to be explicit, like, you said this in the community survey, here's this. I mean, we can kind of, but it could also just be a natural talking point, and it's acknowledging something that we know people are interested in. So Liam just spoke to the one about the affordability of town services, and then there was a lot referencing traffic and how we're responding to that through budget investments, and same with infrastructure maintenance. The ones that I was having trouble painting the clear line was affordable housing and growth management, but that's why I also put it in. Maybe it's not necessarily doing a budget highlight, but thinking more about the messaging behind how we put out certain content.
Yeah, I think depending on like the new investments, right? Like if some of the investments are due as a response to growth, then I think those, like, it becomes like, this is what we're doing. Like, we know we're growing, which means we need another police officer, because we need that police officer to account for the growth we've seen. So to me, it could be some of these investments where the case may be because of an increase in population or something. We could tie that to, hey, this is, we're managing growth. we're doing these investments to help us manage the growth.
Yeah.
So
Right,
that way,
here's our growth response.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah, so to that point, it could be one article about growth response, or it could be an article about increased staffing with reference to that the town is growing. So I guess that's my next step is, first step was creating these links. Next step is going to be actually like coming up with a plan for the content, like what deserves to be a video, what's an article, what's a series, things like that. What maybe this council wants to speak to on camera. Or like how does it tie into a council goal and trying to do some overlap there. And then can you go to the next slide, Liam? There were a couple that were in the budget, items that were in the budget that Liam gave me that didn't necessarily match one of the focus areas, but I saw them tying back to other areas that are of typical interest of residents and kind of connected to quality of life, and then environment and natural resources has been a growing conversation, especially lately with the climate change feasibility studies and things like that. So there are a few projects that'll be easy to connect back to those focus areas, even though they weren't specifically ones that were from the survey. So that's kind of the direction so far, and now it's just a matter of attaching that to a specific plan.
This is wonderful.
For the plan with all of the next 3 months on it, are we going on the road this year? Because in the past we've done Dunstan Firehouse and library, and we've kind of hit the neighborhoods with a budget roundtable, which obviously we didn't do the last 2 years. But I am curious whether people think that there is some value in returning to those, to give people an in-person opportunity so maybe not always getting our outward communication, like we're always talking like, do we create an opportunity for people to let us know directly what they want to talk about? And I think 2 years ago, or maybe it was 3 years ago, we had like a slide deck that we presented for, maybe 10 minutes. And town council had a few slides and BOE had a few slides, and then we kind of just opened it up to whatever the residents wanted to talk about. And I think I ended up going to most of them, I think. And some of them were really well attended, and then others where we wrapped up early because we didn't have any new faces. But
do you know where did this typically happen before or after the council first or second read? I'm just curious, like, is it after council first read, but before school board second read?
So it was, that was gonna be my question as well, John, because I think that predated my involvement at this level. Is the budget's been presented?
Yeah.
So it's something to respond to?
Yes.
And take feedback in before the
Yes.
final decision was made?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Could we, technically we have the finance committee meetings, right? So those are almost kind of like proxies for that to a degree, or is it more, even though I think that's more of us digging into and asking questions, the public is allowed to
I don't know. I
participate.
feel like those are more for council, whereas these sessions were really intended to be for residents to talk about whatever parts they wanted to talk about.
I mean, to me, it sounds like it like the council corner live could be that evolution where we could say, I'm just looking at this. If we do the one on March 31st on growth, we could do one end of April, which would be after first read, but before BOE second read, where we could do a couple or something. Like I think it's a good idea. I think we should.
So what we had done was, I think each counselor and each BOE member took a session, and the assistant town manager at the time just kind of threw us all in a bowl and said, okay, you do this one, you do this one. And it literally was over the span of like 10 days. So it was just like, tonight we're going to be in Dunstan, tomorrow we're going to be at the library, the following night we're back in Chambers, and we just boom, 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 like made it so that if you couldn't attend, I think everyone understood the idea was to not like repeat session. It was kind of just, go to whichever one of these you feel comfortable or, matches your schedule. And we tried to do you know, the library one, I think, was at 11 o'clock in the morning. And then, you know, the Dunstan one was at 6 o'clock at night or something, to kind of give people some options for participation. And it was like rapid fire, like, so it wasn't like they built off from one another. And so that was, I think, a different component of it. And so Counselor Corner Live could absolutely, you know, it could be something similar. My question about that, I guess, would be how many BOE members and how many counselors are interested in engaging in this type of session, and just making sure that, you know, everybody who wants to participate gets a session, and then if we have to strong arm people into taking a session, then we're prepared to do that too. Because I think that there's, you know, probably a mix.
I think we should try and propose it. I mean, maybe we can reach out to the counselors. Like, I would think you, me, and Paul on the finance committee would be comfortable. Don't want to speak for them, but I could see John being comfortable.
Yeah, I'm trying to think like who wouldn't have
would
have
be
participated. And if it was my first year on the board, then it would have been Dawn, Paul, Jean Marie. Like,
most of the players today.
I don't think that necessarily Clucci would have been there, but I think he probably attended.
Yeah. I think we propose it to the counselors. What do you guys think from a logistics perspective?
I think I'm not opposed to it by any means. I mean, I think if memory serves, April, was it the superintendent, and I think Tom and Julie kind of presented, right? Or at least the one I went to, Tom and Julie presented, Larissa sort of moderated, took notes, and then I think there was a representative from each board.
I think they did the one that was here.
Okay. I think it was
and then when it was just me and Dawn at the library,
okay.
I do remember that much.
Okay.
And so we may have kind of taken a cue from them that first night where they kind of kicked it off here. And then after that, it was like, okay, counselors, like, okay, board members, go do your outreach. Now this is, basically it was like, this is officially your budget now. So go communicate your budget to your residents so that you can make an informed decision. And that was kind of the takeaway.
So, yeah, I think that,
but, you know, not to interrupt, we always did wonder whether it was necessarily worth everybody's. That's always what it comes back to is, you know, is what we're investing and putting into it worth it in the end? Are we getting what we hope to get out of it? And it's been so many years now, and weird years too. Like, I don't know.
Well, what's your take since you did participate? Do you think like your library session?
Always thought that it was the sessions that I attended were worth it. I never came away from a session being like, ugh, this was, you know, an hour and a half that I didn't need to be at. But I was also brand new and probably very enthusiastic to, that's just my nature anyway. I like it when we get a bunch of residents all together.
Were they well attended, or is it a matter of
I think it was a mix.
conversation?
I think the feedback we got was that some of them were really well attended, and, you know, we had people who maybe didn't even get to say everything they wanted to say because we had a moderator who was, you know, making sure everyone was fair. And then, you know, we had one session or two sessions where the same 5 people who had already came back, and we were like, what do you want to talk about now?
I mean, we talked about changing our charge to be engagement, and, you know, I feel like we have to create the opportunity and see how it goes. So I think we should try and do it again, if you think that was a good.
I get the sense that people are ready to kind of go back to some of the things the ways in which they used to engage with, you know, elected officials and each other and whatever. And so, you know, what put a stop to it wasn't, oh, we decided it wasn't worth it. COVID was the ultimate reason, I think. And so if memory serves, like, then.
I certainly agree with John. I think that if the committee wants to get serious about engagement, then you need to provide some opportunities for engagement. And I really like that Counselor Live idea. We'll see how that plays out. I think that, you know, essentially a budget roundtable. I might suggest, or I guess I would think we should maybe discuss and consider whether there's a similar hybrid approach to it. I get the romanticized notion of sort of neighborhood meetings. I'm not sure how consequential that or significant that is. Yeah, I'm genuinely asking. I don't think it is or it isn't, but and so, you know, having maybe 2 or 3 sessions or times for people to come in and talk budget, provide some feedback directly to some elected officials, I think is a good idea. I might say, if we're going to allow some remote hybrid kind of post-COVID 21st century technology, then maybe we do it in a centralized location every time rather than moving around. But those are, I guess,
Yeah, I don't remember what the justification was for, I think it probably was this idea that, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we went to the people,
Right,
you know, so people who didn't want to be out, you know, could just meet us at the Dunstan Firehouse or whatever.
Right.
But obviously from a technology standpoint, we have some beautiful facilities. The school has some beautiful facilities, like.
Or maybe we take the owl on the road and go and
Owl
say,
show.
that's actually very
Cradle it
possible.
like a
There's nothing
baby,
unique
walk
about this.
around.
Yeah.
So I think I would just say, I think there's probably an opportunity to just continue with, I think, some improvements that people, and that obviously was pre-COVID. So these things didn't exist, you know, and they were.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's something I would offer. Maybe we don't want technology. Maybe there's truly like people around a table and there's no broadcast, there's no recording. People come and show up and ask questions, and maybe we're good with that. I think those are things.
I'm wondering like how much of the success of it was just due to the optionality of, hey, we have these 10 times, which one works best for you?
Yeah.
And like you could do it like if you did it early in the morning for a couple that were maybe full virtual, so that way anybody could come, or then you did some in the evening, like just to try and again find times that might work for people. Like I wonder if that's more helpful than the location specific approach.
The biggest benefit I think would be the time of day, varying time of day. I like that you said there's a library one too, like if it was like at other like central places that are public meeting spaces. Yeah, I was wondering about the hybrid approach too, of having it accessible, and then sorry, I lost my train of thought. There was one other thing. I'll jump back to it.
I mean, I would definitely be open to even just doing some that were strictly virtual, and then, you know, to your point, then having the ones that are in person, just be in person.
Yeah, it's a good way to do it.
Not trying to manage.
I thought of it just with the Council Corner Live happening and starting that. I don't want to like blur the messages of like what is a Council Corner Live versus what is a roundtable. And if it's talking about a central topic with a couple of counselors, then to me that sounds like the Council Corner Live that we're doing at the end of the month. And so I would almost say that seems like the next one would be about budget, and that there just happen to be a few of them. Yeah. But if it's called roundtable, then we need to distinguish what those two things are.
I feel like this one definitely merits more options, right? Like this first one is kind of a pilot of growth, which what we might learn is part of the attendance challenge was because we only had that one date and time. And when we do these live things, maybe again, depending on the topic, we may want to do it more in this format of like, let's give 3 options. Let's let a counselor own different ones if they're interested in that topic. Maybe it doesn't have to be 2, maybe it could be 1, but like just trying to think of like how we do this in a way that again gives people the option for engagement, because I think that's really what we're trying to do is like give them that option to have a conversation, because we're the roundtables, it sounds like there was a little bit of a presentation, but it was mostly back and forth or
so we presented, you know, the budget summary slide, you know, so this is our net budget increase, these are our expenditures, this is our anticipated revenue, you know. And something you said actually just triggered a different point in my head, which is one thing that would differentiate this from Counselor Corner Live is that the school board has an equal share in this. I mean, they're just, you know, they need to own as much of this communication, because it's, you know, as much as the budget is ours, it's their budget that goes out to referendum. And so a lot of the questions, I think, tend to be school budget related, because that's the portion of the budget that people engage in when they go to the polls.
Yeah. I think that I was thinking the same thing, Allison. I think it's important that we differentiate between the two, and I do think that this would be a series of budget roundtables, you know, again, whether they're in person, virtual, or hybrid. And I think that I agree, there's a component of presentation. And I think it's probably going to be more Q&A, to be honest, less maybe, I mean, you show up to a Q&A and a conversation breaks out, it's fine. But I think that in the past, I think that if I recall correctly, those questions were recorded and then they were responded to in future documents and materials. So, you know, I noticed that, you know, X line's going up 14%, why is that? And there's a response to it. And so there was a very deliberate sort of process there. Whereas Councilor Corner Live, I think it's going to be really geared more towards the discussion. Do I think that there could be one on the budget? Sure. But I think that it's important to differentiate kind of what the format is and what the expectations are, what comes out of it.
Well, I really liked what we did last year, where at least for the town budget, we kind of put together a Google sheet and started to put in questions that we had as counselors. And then I started to add in the questions I was getting that I was like, I don't know if I know the answer to that. And so if the intent is ultimately to like have these conversations to create a broad FAQ document that not only that staff can respond to so that we have it all together. Because I think a lot of times, like more towards the end of the budget, at the end of our review, when people were really starting to pay attention, we had asked a lot of the same questions. And so I would go into that sheet,
and be able to reference.
pull the answer. And so it was helpful for me to communicate. But I love the idea of like using it as a forum to gather questions. Because again, my only concern would be, and maybe this wasn't the case, like if people are asking the counselors, like, why is this in here? Why is that increased? And we're all like, oh, we're not ready for that. But if it's more like, hey, what was like, after your review, what was top of mind? What were some of your key takeaways that you want us to think about or go back and get some answers? Like that, that sounds great.
Yep, I think it's all in how you frame it. I think there were definitely some gotcha moments where somebody would, you know, cite the number of buses that the school department had and then cite the number of drivers we had on staff and then ask why there was a discrepancy between the two numbers. And I'm like, absolutely no idea. That's a great question. Let me look into that for you. And that's kind of where you just take, you know, you say, you know, but I know that for the school department, those roundtables definitely resulted in a FAQ that we could all reference for sure.
So maybe just as a next step for this, we can just like poll the council, make sure everybody on the council is comfortable doing this again. And then to your point, with all the changes in the school board, make sure that they want to participate. Do you think we should do it if they, for some reason, decide that it's not the right opportunity for them this year? Should we still do it at least at the council level?
I don't know. Honestly, that might change my perspective on it. Only because the past precedent was that we did get a lot of school, like it was very school budget heavy.
I anticipate it might still be that.
And so if they're not interested or they want to do something different, that might change my perspective on the frequency or maybe which counselors need to be, you know, engaged. I think, you know, part of the whole idea of it that I really liked at the time that I still would hope that there's an interest in is it wasn't just all the finance committee members. It was, you know, all the counselors and board members. And if you had a good relationship or if you had, you know, specifically been drawn to a person, you could go to their session and know that, you know, that was the counselor that you were going to get, or that was the school board member that was going to be there answering questions.
So is that why yours was full? Because like
I said, I literally think I went to all of them but one. And that was definitely me just being willing to plug holes. Like, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that. But so in terms of this being an initiative that the school board and the town council collaborated on, like, it just furthers that message that, like, yes, it's two separate budgets. Yes, just the school budget goes to referendum, but all of us are responsible for building this at the same time. All of us have a responsibility to understand the school budget, and all of us kind of, it's that shared responsibility to communicate what's going to referendum.
Mhm.
And so,
The one thing I really like
Yeah.
about school participation is when it goes back to that FAQ, because that was the one area that I felt like I was very careful about how much I went into the weeds asking questions on the school side, knowing that that's not, like, we're not
Yep.
authorized to line item it, but if we get questions
Yep.
that the school board wants to respond to or ask school staff to respond to, because I don't think we really included the school. How did we include the school staff last year when we had questions about the school?
I think they're probably referred to Kate.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
I think
they
it's a,
respond.
I think it's a much different roundtable, and my perspective on it really changes if the board doesn't
Okay.
want to participate.
So let's suggest it and see what the receptivity is. Would it be the finance committee chair that we would want to talk to, or the communications committee chair? Maybe both, just
Maybe
to throw it
both.
out. Okay,
Maybe both.
I
I was trying to do a quick check in my head who overlaps. And I actually don't think that there is a lot of overlap between
Mhm.
those two committees this year.
well, I think both Jenna and Jillian is the comms chair, I
Mhm.
think, and Jenna is
Yes.
the finance chair, and I think
Yes.
Jillian sits on both. So she's kind of
Jillian's not on finance.
I thought she was.
It's Leanne, Kristen Turner,
Oh, okay.
and Jenna.
Okay.
Although they may have had some changes, so I'll definitely check on that.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else on budget, timeline, communication?
I don't think so.
Awesome. Thank you for
Yeah.
engaging in all that.
So the next item was on the website rollout update.
I had a visual for that. I think it's the next slide.
Great.
Just for something to look at. But so it was a couple Fridays ago now that the new website launched, largely the work of Brian, the webmaster. And we've been, you can go to the next slide. We've been up to speed on why the process has happened and the opportunities for improvement. So this is the new site and very much focused more around searchability, visually more appealing, but also just the same structure. So it's not a super big differentiation from the website from the user perspective, being able to navigate and not feeling it's hard to find information now. But there are a couple of highlights that Brian wanted me to convey to all of you based on what now can happen with from a communications perspective with the new site. So a couple of things that he had pointed out to me were, and I don't know if we should go on the site for this at all, but a new feature is we've always had this town news segment where you can post almost like blog post updates with town news. And various departments have them as well. Community Services has their own news page. Public Works has their own news page on their department site. But now there's the ability that all of those all of those news pages across the website can filter into one
That's
central
awesome.
place.
Yeah, that's
So
great.
that's going to be helpful because now, no, you wouldn't know that there's Public Works
Sure.
unless you're going to that
Sure.
department site. So.
Hold on, I want to see that donuts for grown-ups.
I was gonna.
I know. That picture, like I'm going.
That's all I can think about now.
But yeah, so it's like unless you're on the community services page regularly, you're not necessarily going to get their news. So that's helpful from that point. It's also helpful from the town news front where if there's relevant information on the town news page, but it still has a date that's kind of older, it's nice just that there's some more like recent dates all filtered in.
Yeah.
So it just makes it look more substantial.
That's awesome.
There's also a feature where you can, I think there's a bell at the top of this where you can be notified see that bell on the right hand side. So if someone clicks on that, you can like click on if you want an email sent to you automated anytime a new post is created.
Does the town news equate to the e-news, or is that just the town's
Town
section
news
on?
it's the town's section, which is just on the homepage.
Okay,
But I try to pull in from the
Mhm.
newsletter, something like that. So anytime there's a newsletter, I would put it as a town news post.
Okay.
too. But yeah, it's still a manual process. So
I
that's
just
one.
wonder if like broader than just e-news, how we talked about subscriptions, right?
Mhm.
I feel like that's a pretty
That's
cool.
that would be a big opportunity. And I'll show you that on the calendar page too. But that's one where, people can get notified if they sign up for it through that
Mhm.
anytime a news post is created.
Given this is on the same platform as the schools,
Mhm.
is there a way to have that subscribe so that you can also subscribe to the schools
That's a good question.
page too?
I'll ask Brian, but I think because they're their own websites, even though it's like on the same
Okay.
software platform,
Okay.
I think it's different. Yeah, you can go to the calendar. Yeah, so speaking of those signups, and the news has this too, but one thing that I've been really liking about the calendar is it has a filter feature. So, so first I'll just show you this. This is showing what's happening today, and then you can click on the day and see it's similar to what it is now, or what it was on the previous site. And then Liam, can you click view full calendar? This brings you to a giant calendar where it lists out everything, and some of the highlights are, so you can see here that it's just like easier to read. You just have to scroll through it, but you can see that it's color coded of orange. I think it's like a public meeting, or, well, can you scroll up actually? So there's a filter, this blue icon on the right hand side. This has been helpful for me as I've been going through looking at the budget dates. So like it's different calendars that are all fed in. And so as long as they're color coded correctly, you could essentially just go and, like, if I only wanted to see, council board and committee meetings, you can just see. So it's just a helpful way to.
Is there a quick way to sync this to your like personal?
There is. So I think it's, try the RSS feed, that gray one next to the bell. Did that do anything?
It pulled up a calendar
Okay,
feed.
I guess we
but-
can't see it on this
Great.
side because it pulled it up for you. But if you click on that like RSS feed, the gray icon, it is connected to an iCal pop-up that you can sync it onto your personal calendar.
Okay.
So that's another useful feature where people can save the dates as reminders. And then another highlight too is just that it has a search feature now at the top for the calendar specifically. So let's try searching. Yeah, good.
All right, let's try that.
Maybe try.
Communication.
Loud and on, yeah. There we
There
are.
it is. All right.
That's awesome.
But yeah, that'll be very helpful. So those are some of the calendar features. And so I like the color coding element, the being able to filter, and being able to save it onto your personal calendar. Can you go back to the slide?
Yeah.
Is this all fully like the stuff that was on before is now on there? Because I noticed like when it first changed, some of the sites weren't fully live, maybe.
Maybe. I think it's.
You know what I think the issue, like for some reason before I would always go to Google and that's how I would find stuff. And when I would click the link on Google, it wouldn't open the town, or you'd get an error. But then when I went to the site and searched in the site
Interesting.
bar, it worked.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, if maybe it took a little bit for it to catch up, or if it's something where
I think it changed. Let me test it, because I was looking for the town survey results.
Oh, that one. I actually just reached out about that one because it was an old news post, and I think only like the 2022 news post transferred over. So that's in.
I like clicked something and it brought up like the 404.
Yeah, I think as those
means.
are. Oh, you know what it is? He said anytime a 404 comes up, Brian can like go and see on the back end like when those are coming up, and so he's going and like reconnecting them as they come in.
Okay.
Just in case for situations like that. So another feature that he was telling me about is he's calling it page pops, but it's basically, I think I just saw it pop up too when you were on the website, but it's like when you go on the site for the first time and then it tells you the welcome to the new website, there's a lot more opportunity to create those. Like if there's a town closure or some other immediate announcement that needs to get at the front of people. You can do that based on you can set it as a schedule, or you can do it on certain pages. So that's a new feature.
Awesome.
We talked about the calendar, the improved search functionality. So now it does, you can do it based on, like, if I put in beach, it'll also pull up shore, like other synonyms that go along with it. And it just shows a lot more results than on the previous site. And it also highlights the word, so you can see specifically on the page where that word came up. Yeah.
Amazing.
And then lastly, the staff directory. I think there was a staff directory before, but now it's just more organized because you can filter by department, you can search, and it's more accessible right from the homepage. And then I wanted to discuss also some of the new communications opportunities that come about because of this. And one was being able to subscribe, like anytime a news post is updated, and we can feature that as a resource or tool for people more. Same with the calendar feature, being able to save it, add it to your own calendar, or get reminders or something. But a couple of things that were kind of based on goals that we had at the beginning of the year. One is the projects page. There's a huge opportunity there to highlight. We've been calling it like hot topics or something too, but not just projects that are happening, but what is being talked about at a council level right now. And if it's an ongoing thing, being able to provide more context, historical context on the issue. So we'll be looking to build that out more now that we have the new site and a place to do it, and some manipulation to be able to make the page look nice and really get into the details of filtering, things like that. Also, we had talked in our goals for this committee about being able to feature more of the counselors and kind of provide more background on all of you. And so I think with the new page, I mean, you all have your photos up there, but being able to build it out more with some bios, or you have the committees listed out, but maybe there's some opportunity to link that back to the committee page or articles that you've written about it or something like that.
I was just curious to see like what other counselors do. I think there were counselors just going on some web pages, and like some would kind of like, you could click on like the picture of like we have, and then it would bring it to their own page, and then it would like have a bio, but then it also somehow pulled in like if they did use social media to communicate, like you could kind of embed it in there. Yeah, so then they could actually follow the counselor too.
And I think that's something that we couldn't have done on our old site, but now we can. So yeah, that's a good one. So there's more opportunity to be able to build that out and give you some more personality and things like that.
Even though most of my posts are just sharing your posts.
You're sharing town posts.
So I don't know if it would be that great to follow me, but.
We talked about doing this, or I've been wanting to do this for a while, but I'm finally now putting, anytime we have a council corner that goes out in the newsletter, putting it onto this council Outlook page. So now all the council corners are going to be published on the website, and I put up the ones from the past couple months. They kind of just look the same concept of like being a blog post, and so you can see the date associated with it. But those are gonna, there's a page, it's called Council Outlook, and so I've been putting them on that. We also had been doing some council chair reports back in 2021 and even 2020. So kind of revamping that and using this page more as an opportunity to provide updates and not just a standalone page. And then we had also talked about at the beginning of the year having a goal of giving more board and committee updates, and there's some of those pages even maybe outdated, so just like being able to go through those and update that with content and any relevant news articles, and creating more of a platform for those committee members to add content to it too. So those are things that now that we have the new website, it's just going to be easier to do in a way that's visually appealing and being able to promote that out. But yeah, so that's the new website. The rollout has gone very smoothly, and we haven't done a big announcement about it yet, but it's going to be included in the newsletter tomorrow, and then we'll be pushing it on social media.
Awesome.
Awesome.
It does look great. Like the couple times I've been on it, it definitely is much easier.
It's easier to
To
read.
navigate.
Even,
Yeah.
like with the
Yes.
clear,
Yep.
clear text.
So Brian has been leading this with you.
Mhm.
With you, he's been doing an awesome
Yeah,
job.
it's done a great job.
Sorry, keep kicking the table. All right, so next item is topics for discussion. So the next one was Counselor Corner e-news topic planning, which we kind of touched on a little bit. My perspective is, definitely budget, probably April, May, June, there should be an article. It would be great if like you, me, and Paul would each kind of take turns on one.
Sure.
So that's what I would kind of propose for that. And then the other one that I was thinking maybe we also keep top of mind is the growth exemption for the downs, which kind of relates to the next bullet, which is, does it make sense to just have a counselor each month opposite of the budget also write one? And that's where I thought maybe like, because it would be you, me, and Paul for finance. If we said Ken, John, and Jean Marie / Dawn could write one for the downs exemption, then everybody could kind of take a turn.
Yeah.
And I think those are like the two hot topics probably for the next 3 months. My guess would be like trying to keep those top of mind.
Yeah.
Do you
Might be a
think
good.
you would build off of it like a series or sequence, or is it each like from a different, is it kind of like the repetition of content, but from a different?
I think it could
counselor?
be, like in my opinion, as the process advances for the downs, I think having somebody kind of recognize the advancement of the process.
It's almost like updates.
Yeah, but also
ongoing.
to share their view if they want to share their view. So that could be for the downs piece. But to me, it's the challenge I think we've had this far, which is why I suggested it as an item, was the communication with the public in terms of communicating the process a little bit, I think has been a little off. And so just being able to articulate a little bit more like, we are here and we need to do this, this, and this before we're here. And then during the counselor corner, they could say, now we're here, but still let people know that there's still a point until we make a decision, a final decision. And so I just don't know what the process is yet to know exactly
Right.
how that lines up. But I feel like at least just starting to think about how we would want to communicate, I think would be helpful. And then for the budget, I see it could be as well, like the series that again, it's like 2 series happening at the same time. The first of the month could be on the budget and the mid-month could be on growth in the downs.
Okay. I'll do it.
That's my thought. I don't know
Yeah,
if
I
there's
think
other-
that's great. I think that as long as, this all kind of hinges on a process that we're not even sure about in terms of timeline. And so we're kind of at the mercy of seeing how we've now given the exemption process over to the staff. And so, whether or not that lines up with this budget alternating every other
Mhm.
week, remains to be seen. But if it does, and that is a natural flow, then I think that that's a great idea.
Yeah.
We split it 3 and 3,
Mhm.
and then we make sure that the emphasis is on the process,
Mhm.
where we are, what's next, so that people understand what to expect. And obviously, our own perspectives come through when we write, and a little bit of that is okay too, because that's the whole point of Counselor Corner. So,
And again, maybe that's like plan A.
yeah.
And then plan B will be, as the process becomes more defined, maybe there's like one point where we could give an update, but we could always default back to budget, especially if we're doing these sessions. Like it would just be good to have somebody say, here's what I heard. This was an interesting conversation. So, I think clearly we'll have stuff for budget.
Mhm.
We will probably have something around the downs. I don't know what else at this point is like a big boulder. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that might be a big boulder that we would want to talk about.
No, but if it were my turn, and we didn't have the downs to talk about, I could certainly talk about, some of the climate action stuff that's happening, or, so there are, people could pull from their liaison and committee
Yeah, I think that's
assignments, I think,
Yeah.
if we were lacking for a topic. And it wouldn't have that nice cohesive, drive that we're hoping for, but again,
Mhm.
we're kind of at the mercy of that process now for the exemption, so.
Cool. All right. So the next item, so maybe just to summarize, what I heard was plan A is trying to get a schedule for both.
Yep.
But plan B would be if for some reason the growth stuff doesn't work, maybe we still ask the counselors to pencil in and say, you'll do this time.
Yep.
And if for some reason growth isn't appropriate, then pull from your liaison
Sure.
role and draft something, which I think is also a good to update on.
Yeah, Jean Marie may want to do one on the charter.
Yeah, there might be a
That's
need
still
for
going on
another
too.
one there.
Okay, yeah, another,
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay, the next item is the Downs exemption council communication brainstorm. And so again, this was just starting to think about how can we put some structure around how we communicate as a council. There was an email today around GPCOG, which I wasn't even thinking of GPCOG as like a stakeholder. And so I think the question is like, who are the key stakeholders that we need to be communicating with around this? Who should be doing what, and when do we want to do it? And again, the when we might not be able to fill in just yet because I think it's going to be dependent on a lot of things. So I just put in some placeholders, really just my personal brainstorming to give us something to react to, which doesn't mean that's what we're going to do, but I just figured it could be something we could kind of use as a discussion. And then I would think having April, you and Ken afterwards maybe work from it and add stuff or delete stuff. Like we can just make it an iterative thing.
Yep.
And then come the next communications meeting, I see us adding that as an agenda item to say, like, do we feel like this is the approach we want to take? And hopefully we can fill in some of the dates a little bit more.
Yeah, so what you've sent is super comprehensive. Admittedly, I looked at it on my phone in the carpool pickup line. And so I haven't had a lot of time to really sit down and give it the attention that it definitely deserves. But I think that giving us a framework for and an expectation for how we're going to communicate, for lack of a better phrase, keeps us out of trouble. It keeps us all on the same page. It keeps us all moving in the same direction, and it keeps our messaging consistent. And that's, I think what we're striving for in all kinds of different pockets. And so this is no different.
Yeah.
And I think what we have found over the last couple of weeks is just there's a lot of inconsistency in what we're hearing from residents. There's inconsistency on the council. There's inconsistency among staff. And so we just need to make sure that, as this, because I really do feel like this falls under our charge, that, we have key takeaways, that we've discussed, that, at least at the committee level, we can say, yeah, I think there's consensus that is a main theme that needs to be communicated. And that way we're not all going in different directions.
And I think in this latest order that we had, if you just read some of the stuff that was in the press, again, the press may pick things that aren't necessarily what we intended. And so being able to be clear too, with the media as they cover this stuff. And I don't know, Allison, if that's the role you play working directly with the media or how that would work. But if we want to if we want to drive or give the media almost like a press release, right? We do a press release that says this is where the council is. So then the media can leverage that press release and really make sure that they're talking from the facts as opposed to interpreting it based on kind of where we are. I think that's kind of what I'm thinking is making sure not only are we communicating to the public, but we're giving the media the right information so that they can use that as source content, or we can refer them to that if they want to talk about it or cover it in whatever articles they want to do. But maybe just from an audience perspective, maybe I'll talk about the framework, and we don't have to spend time on the details because you can kind of look at them and see what's in there. But again, I don't know, Liam, can you share if you're not, just so that people can follow along? I guess I could share. Oh, you got it. Okay. So I just was thinking, okay, looking at the top, what are the things we want to think about? So it's who's the audience? What's the objective of the communication? What are some specific tactics we might want to do? Who owns it in terms of actually doing it? What's our timing of when? And then anything, again, that we might want to fill this out just to add some key messages or things we want to do. So I said the council was maybe a stakeholder that we need to communicate, and that's more internally within the council just to make sure we're on the same page. The then there's the general public, which I think is the primary focus, which is trying to get at like what are the objectives and tactics and timing that we want to do. So I did include things in there like the e-news article, assuming that we're going to use that as a tactic. But again, maybe it's not the next couple of months. Like I said, maybe it's going to be like 3 months, 6 months, whenever,
Right, we don't
whatever
know
the
what
process
timeline
is.
is. Yeah.
And then town committees, and again, Don provided some of these stakeholders that I thought, again, might be worth considering. So like, as we make progress, how do we as liaisons want to communicate things to our committees or with the staff liaison, whoever is appropriate, just to make sure it's on their agendas if there's something relevant to cover with them. The Downs team, again, that's a stakeholder in the process. We had general stakeholder groups like GPCOG, SEDCO, and MMA. And then media engagement. I don't know if there's like an official communications channel to the media to say, here's our position, or like take this and use this as your source content, like a press release.
Yeah.
And then I put in the school and school building committee just in case, which might fit under town committees. Like we could bucket that there, but I just know since we're talking about land a little bit, we just need to kind of make sure we're keeping the communication open with that committee on what's happening.
Yep.
And then again, I just started to just throw stuff in here that I thought we should think about, which doesn't mean it's right. And I put people's names, which doesn't mean that's their names. I was just asking like who would make the most sense to own it. So that was kind of my attempt at least giving us a framework to work within.
Yeah.
Anything come top of mind for anybody, just in terms of like key things we do need to be thinking about from a communications perspective with the public more in particular, I think.
When I think of the topic, I think like we've talked about this with previous topics too, of like if someone wants to know more about this topic, where are they going to go and what are they going to find out from that? So I guess you could like go back and watch meetings, but someone wouldn't necessarily know how to do that, or it's all kind of like in separate places. So I do see that a web page would be helpful. I don't know if the web page is on the Downs exemption or if it's more of like bigger picture of what the title is and what type of information you're finding out on that website, but at least a collective location to find access to the resources to learn more.
Like the TIFF page.
Like the TIFF
Yeah.
page,
Yeah.
Just
It's an overview
where to
page
drive
on
people
TIFF.
to.
Yeah.
And where we're storing the information, right?
Exactly.
Because I think we've gotten a lot of good information on this that, again, is in different places. And so just being able to like say, this is where we're keeping track of all of these different pieces that have come in. Like Paul shared with us a presentation that the Downs did for SEDCO that was different than what we saw, but like having a link to that on the same
In a
page,
that
yeah,
matches,
would just be helpful for the public to be able to say like, this is like the history of events and the assets that you can look at if you want to learn the history.
And in developing the TIFs page, one of the things we started with is saying it would be helpful to have an FAQ section because there's a lot of misconceptions about the topic. And so we're talking about developing that out, but through the process of putting everything on there, it's kind of like, oh, these are answering a lot of the questions by just describing it in one place. So if there are misconceptions in public or common themes that you keep hearing, there's a way to address that in an unbiased way on the website just by providing information.
Yeah, I mean, I think to Councilor Sadler's point, I mean, obviously it's really comprehensive. It's almost written like a emergency action plan for how to communicate out really volatile subjects. But I think to your point, I mean, until we know what it is and when, it's tough to really get going on this. I mean, I think that the general tenets are excellent, and this is really a framework to follow with any big decision.
Yeah.
Right? But I think without knowing if there's even going to be an exemption, right? And if the exemption, what the significance or magnitude of it is, would I suggest that we go through such a comprehensive, if the exemption is for 10 additional units every year, probably not. But if it's so I think that there's some I think the communication plan has to somewhat match the significance of the impact and magnitude.
Yeah.
And so, but other than that, I think it's a great framework and one that could actually be applied to and it seems like in this town, there's always
Always.
some subject going on that requires a whole heck of a lot of communication and education. And so I think it's a great piece of work otherwise. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I definitely want to give some thought to how to create a central place for all of this
Mhm.
stuff.
Mhm.
I don't know that necessarily Downs exemption with a tab is, what the town needs
Yeah.
to be.
We have the separate Downs site, and this could just be an add-on where we already have all of the material, rather than it being like its
Do we?
own. Yeah, if there's
Ooh.
something that's like the
It's
down.
through like the planning and codes department.
Yeah, let me see if I can pull it up.
But that's another example of the projects page, if we could like build that up.
Yeah.
It's not like a project,
It's-
but
It's where we also sort
Issues.
all of the
Yeah.
downtown committee
Like in the
stuff.
pipeline, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think something like that would be helpful. I do think too, we should be thinking about like the same thing we're talking about with budget for how we're being creative, or even the Counselor Corner Live with roundtables. Like, is that something, again, I think to Liam's point, like in one case, we don't want to go too far because we don't want to commit, because by committing to doing so much, it leads that there's a commitment to the outcome, which I don't think we've decided yet.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
I think though, maybe we could look at this as like, for any major communications process, like what would be the standard protocol that we would try and follow? And then again, we may not have to get all the way through because it may not get past a first read. And so if it doesn't get past a first read, then it's like nothing else beyond that happens. But what's the protocol or things we would want to consider?
Right, do we want to schedule a roundtable 2 weeks before a first read? Like,
Yeah.
does that want to kind of be our standard
Mhm.
operating protocol? I'm
Yeah.
picking up what you're putting down.
So maybe we make this less about the GMO exemption
Yeah.
because of the unknowns, and just make it more about like standard
Like a
protocol for
strategy.
complicated
Yeah.
issues that we
Yeah.
can just say like, look, this is our playbook
right.
and let's try and like use this when it makes sense.
That kind of does go back
You
to,
were talking about
Yeah.
that a lot, yeah.
I think last year's assembly of communication, we do have a public engagement manual that I
Mhm.
think my
I remember that,
predecessor
yeah.
developed. And so I think that's all kind of cyclical. But
Yeah.
so
New
that's
people
kind of
rotate in.
I mean, can I quote it? Absolutely not. But do I think that it's again, probably another opportunity because it's the same subject, right?
Yeah.
It's why this whole committee is here. It's about communication and engagement and educating the public and building consensus. And so I think that I would say this is some great organic work that absolutely makes sense. How does this relate to what previous
Yeah.
conversations on the subject? How does it align? How, it's almost like a blind.
And I remember
test.
you've shared that before.
Yeah.
And I think everybody on the communications committee at that time was asked to review it. I remember I reviewed it, but I don't remember what was in it. So it might be another thing to dust off again.
I'm aware of its existence.
Definitely.
Again, I can't
Yeah,
quote it or tell you how
definitely.
much this aligns, but
Review.
there's a document out there.
Well, there might
right?
be some nuggets in there
Right,
too
right,
that we
sure.
might want to, like, to me, it's like, what's our template for action, which
Mhm.
I'm sure that's a good, like, manual,
Mhm.
but then it's like, well, okay, like, let's fill in the blanks of the different things we can do.
But it does kind of go to that previous conversation we had about with our guests, I think at the beginning of the year, maybe before the end of last year, about engagement and like
Yeah.
what's the process, what's the threshold, or what are the qualifiers of an issue to warrant
Yeah.
additional steps for engagement, right?
Mhm.
How do you make something that maybe is a little bit subjective but objective?
Mhm.
It's, well, is it
What
require an
issues are we
exemption of the
flagging?
ordinance? Right,
Yeah.
yeah. Is it gonna, I think, again, this is the whole ICE conversation, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing on its face that was unique. It was just something that was the challenge.
Yeah,
So that was
public interest.
a bit controversial,
Mhm.
and so how do you, but this one I think is much more straightforward in that regard.
Cool. So maybe, again, we can genericize this, and maybe the action is look at, like, keep the Downs exemption in mind as we're thinking about this, because I think it's just a real example
Study.
to think about. But let's all kind of, again, revisit that manual again, just to kind of review it, and then maybe spend some time individually tweaking this, and at the next meeting, if we do know more about the down stuff, we could actually start to populate it with
Sure.
some very specific things maybe that we would want to do.
Sure.
Cool. Anything else on this before we move on to public comment? If there's anybody in the public who would like to say something?
So
Nope, I'm good.
you're the whole audience.
Great. Next item is future agenda items. I think we talked about 2 today, so one maybe kind of revisiting this, and I forget what the other one was now.
Do we want to, how are we going to engage the BOE between now and next meeting?
I can take the action to reach out to Jillian and Jenna
Okay,
about seeing their interest. And I know when I talked to Jillian, she had talked about maybe like we just need to figure out calendars, like when do we want to join them or when do they want to join us to have more of a conversation about stuff. So I think, and do we want to focus on the budget? So I think that's still on the table that we just need to figure out, like, is it the next meeting we want to potentially do a joint conversation around budget communications and just keep alignment on where we are? And if we really are doing these roundtables, again, that might be a good topic to say, like, based on what we did in the past, based on what we learned from Counselor Corner, what do we want this to really look like and how do we want to do it, and just make sure we're all on the same page. So that might be a good thing to bring them into.
Okay.
Any other thoughts for other agenda items?
when is our next meeting?
It would
Just
be,
trying to think like timeline. Is it the 11th?
April 11th.
Oh, I won't be here. We potentially put out a different date for that meeting?
yeah, we can change it.
Okay, just in terms of the budget and this committee, just thinking about how far along in the budget process we'll be by April 11th. In terms of scheduling a bunch of roundtables, how much lead time do we need
Oh, yeah,
to get
true.
those
That's a good
scheduled,
point.
coordinated? People need to block those off on their calendar.
Mhm.
Because I know everybody's calendar fills up, and of course that week after is
What?
vacation.
Why don't we, do you want to plan on the 4th?
That would be great.
Yeah.
Why don't we do
plan for
the
that.
Yeah,
4th
as
at
long
4?
as that, I would appreciate that, guys. Thank you.
I think the only thing that I would say is, I do expect this month we didn't have, communications and appointments negotiations used to be back to back on the first Monday of every month. And there has historically been some overlap on that committee. So I expect there will be a committee meeting next Monday, so we'll just need to adjourn by 5:30.
Okay.
As long as we can
That'd
do
be
that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's very reasonable. Thank you.
4th will be our next meeting.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay.
And that should be, Tom will present on the 30th, so that will give some time to digest.
Yep,
and start
I think
getting a better
that-
idea.
That timeline works great.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay, perfect.
Just confirm with Ken that works for him too.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be a problem. Great. All right. Next item is adjournment. Make a motion.
So moved?
Second.